Hola, clase. Today, we're going to be talking about affirmative two commands. In the last chapter, we learned how to use usted and ustedes commands to tell people to do things in a more polite way. In this chapter, we're going to learn how to tell people who we treat in a more informal way to do things. So those are called two commands because we use them to talk to our friends or people who are younger than us, people who we are close to and comfortable with, so we can treat them in maybe a less formal manner and use the pronoun to with them. Specifically today, we are looking at affirmative two commands. So we are going to learn how to tell our friends what to do, like what we want them to do, all right? In the next lesson, we'll be learning about negative two commands. So we'll learn how to tell people not to do something, how to tell them actions that we don't want them to do or things that we don't want them to do. You're gonna see that we have to form affirmative and negative two commands differently. So we actually have to use one verb to tell someone that we want them to do something, and then we have to use a different form of that verb to tell them that we don't want them to do something. I know it gets a little bit complicated. There's a lot more to remember with two commands than we had to remember with usted and ustedes commands, but we'll take it one step at a time. And I think that here, pretty soon, you will understand how to use informal commands. As you can imagine, parents use informal commands all the time to tell their kids what they want them to do and what they don't want them to do. So if you could take all of the things that your parents tell you to do when you're at home or when you're going to school or when you need to do your homework, if you could take all of those things and translate those into Spanish, you would more than likely be translating all of those commands into informal commands, into two commands, because your parents treat you in an informal way, right? And I think if we're honest, informal commands are probably the commands that we have the most motivation to follow because, you know, usted commands, polite commands, if somebody asks us politely, can you please close the door? You know, like our life doesn't depend on it, right? But when our parents ask us to do something, there's a good chance that there's going to be consequences if we don't do what they're telling us to do. La chancla, I've got a picture here that says La Chancla. The chancla, you can consider this your word of the day. The La Chancla is a sandal, but it's so much more than that. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, it becomes a weapon. So here, you know, around here in Indiana, if you grew up and your parents might spank you, or they might use a wooden spoon or something like that. Well, in a lot of Latin American countries, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, they use La Chancla, not only to hit you, but if you try to run, they can throw it at you. So it becomes a flying weapon. And I'll have to show you a video of that in class. But just think of all of the commands that your parents give you. Maybe your mom specifically, maybe your dad tells you what to do a lot too. Think of all of those commands, and those are two commands in Spanish. All right, so now let's look at how we form our affirmative two commands, our regular affirmative two commands. Whenever we want to tell someone to do something, this is what we'll do. If we have the verb hablar, it just becomes habla. We go to the él, ella, usted form of the verb in the present tense. That's it. It's that simple. For comer, it would be come. For escribir, it would be escribe. So here's the crazy thing. We don't have to add the opposite ending. We just go to the él, ella, usted form of the verb in the present tense, and that's our command. So if I want to tell you in an informal way to talk, I would say, tú habla. If I want to tell you to eat, tú come. If I want to tell you to write, tú escribe. It's really weird, right? Because we should be saying tú hablas, but that is just saying you speak. Like that's a statement. You speak, you talk. If I want to command you to talk, I have to say tú habla. All right. So this is how you form affirmative to command. It's not difficult. It just goes against the grain of the way that you normally conjugate your verbs in the to form. All right, so here's some examples of how easy this is. Keep in mind that you have an implied subject in all of these sentences. Your implied subject is to, okay? So you're talking to someone, you're calling them you, but you're just omitting that. There's no reason to say the you every single time or the to every single time. So you're just giving a command to one person who you treat informally. And so the subject to is implied in all of these. All right. So the first one there, we're wanting to conjugate the verb preparar. We're wanting to command you to prepare something. Por favor, prepara unos sándwiches. So we just do one step. We take off the AR and we add the ending that we would put on our ella usted form of the verb in the present tense. Prepara. So it's only one step. All right. The next one, Alicia limpia el cuarto de baño. All we did was we took off the AR and we added our regular ending in the present tense for the ella usted form of the verb. Lava los platos. Wash the plates, wash the dishes. Lavar. Duerme ahora. Sleep now. We used the verb dormir here. Remember, it is an O to UE stem changer. And so in the present tense, in the ella usted form of the verb, the O changes to a UE. And then we drop that IR off the end and we add an E, right? That's the regular ending that we would usually use for the ella usted form of the verb. So this is kind of like saying, tú, duerme ahora, you, sleep now. Barre el piso, so sweep the floor. We take off the ER, we add our regular ending for the ella usted form of the verb in the present tense, and we come up with barre. Tú, barre el piso, sweep the floor. This is how you do it. Remember, it is only one step. It is really simple. For most of your affirmative commands, they're going to be regular. You just go to the ella usted form of the present tense, and it won't be too hard. But for some of your verbs, they are irregular. And so there are 7 irregular affirmative commands. Ser becomes se, ir is ve, hacer is has, decir is di, poner, pon, salir, sal, tener, ten, and venir, ven. Now, if you put these in the right order, you can actually come up with a sentence for these that might help you remember them. And so it goes like this. This is at the bottom of the screen. Vendi sal as ten weaponse, which it sounds like Vin Diesel has 10 weapons, if you say that quickly enough. All right. So study these. Remember that when you are giving a command with one of these, if you want to tell someone in an informal way, for example, do your homework, you would say as tu tarea, all right? Remember, if we wanted to tell them in a formal way to do that, we said haga su tarea, right? So these are your irregulars that you'll want to commit to memory. Here's just a couple examples using some of these irregular affirmative commands and sentences. So, haz la cama antes de salir, make the bed before leaving. Pon la ropa sucia en la lavadora. So put the dirty clothes in the washer. Di la verdad. So tell the truth. Ve a la iglesia. Go to church. Those are just a few examples using these irregulars. And so as you can see, when you conjugate those verbs in parentheses, you're going to need to remember these irregular forms. And the last thing that I want to point out is pronoun placement. So where does the pronoun go in the sentence when you're using these affirmative to commands? So if the command is affirmative, if you're telling someone to do something like we are in this lesson today, then the pronoun is always going to be attached to the end of the verb. So lávalo, for example, wash it. That pronoun lo, it is a direct object pronoun, right? So it's going to be attached to the end. All of your pronouns, so your reflexive pronouns, your direct and indirect object pronouns, they will always get attached to the end of the verb when you're giving an affirmative to command. But if you are giving a negative to command, right? So if the command is negative and you're telling them not to do something, then the pronoun is always going to come before the verb. So no lo laves. don't wash it. Your pronoun has to come in front of the verb. In that case, you don't have a choice. You can't attach it to the end. If you did that, it would be wrong. All right. So direct objects, indirect objects, reflexive pronouns, they all need to come before the verb. You will be quizzed and tested on this during this chapter. In the last chapter, we just kind of started to learn about it. And you were just aware of it. In this chapter, you'll actually need to know where that pronoun goes, all right? It'll probably be set up as a multiple choice, but you do need to know where it goes. All right, so this is where we'll end today. We will continue learning more about affirmative two commands and negative two commands in the rest of this chapter.